What have we said so far about the Ketores? We spoke about three different segments of the Avoda, the first of which we called Chatias HaGecholim, Chitui HaGecholim, which means that the Kohen Gadol takes a machta and he runs up the ramp, digs the machta into the gecholim. We had many different discussions about how he does that and about which gecholim he takes. And then he places this machta with gecholim at a certain particular point in the Azor, which is called the Rovet Aravi, and that was based on a Mishnah later on. And then we get to stage number 2, which is called Chafina. And Chafina, we said, meant that there's a second machta. That machta is filled with Ketores, and that Ketores has to be transferred from that second machta over to the Gecholim, but not directly. We're not going to take the machta with the Ketores and pour it into the machta that's on the Azor, and the ground of the Azor, and the step of the Azor that has Gecholim into, but rather we have to transfer the Ketores from the second machta into a kaf. And from that kaf, which is now full of Ketores, the Kohen Gadol is going to take the kaf and the machta, taking them into the Kodesh Kodshim. That's already the last stage of Haktorah. But now the question is, how do we get the Ketores from the second machta into the kaf? And that leads us to the second major stage of Ketores, which is called Chafina, in which the Kohen Gadol has to dig his hands into the Ketores that is in the second machta, and what he picks up of the Ketores, he now places into a kaf. He's going to run with that kaf over to the first machta that has the gecholim, holding the machta with gecholim in the right hand, the kaf with the Ketores in the left hand, and bring the two into the Kodesh Kodshim. And then he's going to take the kaf and pour the contents of the kaf into the machta of gecholim in order to achieve the haktorah of the Ketores. One of the discussions we'll have is, where in the Kodesh Kodshim is he going to do this? Where specifically in the Kodesh Kodshim to pinpoint the location of the haktorah when the contents of the Ketores in the kaf in the left hand of the Kohen Gadol are poured into the macht of gecholim in the right hand of the Kohen Gadol? Where exactly does that take place? That's one of the questions that we're going to address today. But before this, I want to share with you a Migdash David, one of the outstanding achronim on Kodshim. Now, we quoted a pasuk, which is the source for Chafina, and the Torah says, again in Parshas Achrimos, it says, "Umelo chafnav k'torah sami." Melo chafnav. And we had many discussions about what exactly is melo chafnav. We spoke about how much ketores he takes into his hands in order to transfer them over to the kaf. Is it full? Is it less than full? We spoke about whether the chafina has a din of a psul of pigul, machshavas pigul at the time of the chafina. And we even had a suffix as to whether or not the Kohen Gadol himself has to dig his hands into the machta to lift up the Ktoris, or another Kohen could do that and place the Ktoris to the Kohen Gadol's hands. And we spoke about exactly how much Ktoris has to be lifted up. We spoke about the midah and the different sizes depending upon the hands of the Kohen Gadol. All these discussions we had yesterday. But the Mikdash David introduces a whole another element into the equation. He says the following. Remember, we had the first machta where he digs up the gecholim. That machta is clearly a kli sharis. And that's where the aktar is going to take place, in that machta of gecholim. But now we have a second machta. And the second machta has the Ktoris in it. The Yerushalmi says that the second machta is a kli chol. It's not a kli sharis. It has not been sanctified. Therefore, remember that we said yesterday, just to remind you and remind myself, that after the chafina, there's still some ktoris left in the machta number 2. And the surplus, if you will, the overflow of the ktoris in the second machta will be brought on the Mizbeach tomorrow, on the 11th of Tishrei. Now, the Mikdash David says, wait a minute, I'm a little bit confused. If the second machta is a kli chol, it's not a kli kodesh, it's not a kli shares, then at best, the sanctity, the kedusha of the Ktoris that's left in the second machta after the chafina would be that of what's called kedushas damin. Right? We know in Kodshim that all of Kodshim can be subdivided into 2 categories. There's kedushas guf, anything that's designated for the mizbeach, whether it's zvachim, whether it's menachos, whether it's nisachim. And then we have something called kedushas damim, otherwise known as a monetary kedusha. It's not kedushas haguf. Now, one of the main differences between kedushas haguf and kedushas damim is pidyon. In kedushas haguf, barring exception in cases of disqualification and so, there's no pidyon on kedushas haguf. But kedushas damim, where the object is not inherently kadosh, it's only its value, its monetary value, there is pidyon. Says the Mikdash David, what's going on here? The avoda of the chafina, when the Kohen Gadol puts his hands into the machta, is the ktoris in the machta is kadosh b'kedushas damim. It doesn't have kedushas haguf. You follow the question. The Mikdash David is bothered. How could we define and upgrade the chafina as an avoda? There's no such thing as an avoda on kedushas damim. Kedushas damim doesn't lend itself to avoda. Avoda is for haktar al gabi mizbeach, and that can apply to kedushas haguf. It cannot apply to kedushas damim. Now, if the second machta is a kli chol, and therefore the ktores in the second machta is nothing more than kedushas damim, How could the Kohen Gadol now do a chafina on Ketores that's not Kodesh B'Kedusha Guf? And we want to consider the chafina as an avoda to the extent to which that, according to one side of the sugya in Yuma, if the Kohen Gadol has a machsheves pigul at the time of the chafina, it passes the Ketores. It must be, if the chafina is a full-fledged kedusha, a full-fledged avoda, that the Ketores, which the Kohen Gadol is being chofed, is got to be Kodesh B'Kedusha Saguf. Now the Mikdash David asks a second kash. Okay, this second kash is is a little more complicated, a little more challenging, but we'll try it. And I don't know if you have the text in front of me. We're in footnote number Ayin Hey, here on page Hey. He says that later on, we haven't gotten to this yet, but we're going to see a sugya that we'll summarize later, that chafina from the machta is equal to kmitza in menachos. Now, wait a second. Kmitza in menachos takes place in a klishares. The solas, the mincha, is in a klishares, and the kohen does kmitza. How can you compare that to chafina, which is a chafina from a machta, and the machta is not a klishares? It's a klichol. Now he quotes a third kash. The Gemara says that mi'ikar adin, if the Kohen Gadol would enter into the Kodesh Kodshim with chafina, without transferring the Ketores in his chafina over to the kaf, he would bypass and skip the entire process of kaf. Then the Gemara establishes that the Ketores is fine, meaning he'll be makti the Ketores in the Kodesh Kodshim without having transferred the Ketores into the kaf. How could that be? What is going to sanctify the Ketores? The Ketores was taken from the machta, which is a klichol, picked up by the Kohen Gadol and brought into the Kodesh Kodshim. But that Ketores doesn't have Kedusha Zaguf. It was not sanctified. Bishlema, if you understand that after the chafina, the Ketores is placed into the kaf as opposed to the machta has Kedusha Zaguf. It's a klishares, and it's makadesh the Ketores. Then I understand how you could be maktir that Ketores in the Kodesh Kodshim. But if we bypass the kaf and he goes with the Malol Chafnayim straight into the Kodesh Kodshim, he's maktir there the Ketores, that Ketores was not sanctified because it was only in a machta of a klicho. Now, I just want to make one point before we go on. Lefi ani is daiti. What I want to know is, what's the status of the hands of the Kohen Gadol? Now, you may think I'm crazy, but I'd like to present to you an argument, not according to everyone. Not everyone's going to agree, but I want to prove according to one shita, the hands of the Kohen Gadol have the status of a klishares. As wild as that sounds. And once he does the chafina, the Ketores now is sanctified with Kedusha Saguf by virtue of the chafina. I don't need the kaf. So you'll ask me, did I lose it? It's Erev Pesach, things are confusing. So here I want to share with you a sugya, which is quoted here on the same page, in Yuma Daf Memches. And this has to do with something that's called nishpach. The Gemara wants to know what happens if before the Kohen Gadol transfers the Ktores from his hands after the Chafina over to the Kaf, before he gets to the Kaf, the Ktores falls on the Ritzpah. Now, in order to appreciate the Gemara, we'll go back to basics. Let's review basics. In Avodas HaZvachim, we need Shechita followed by Kabbalah. And there's a sugya, and we've seen it many times, of nishpach. What happens if the dam ends up on the Ritzvas Hazar? And it depends. If it went from the Tzavar HaBehema right down to the Ritzvah, then it's possible. The dam is possible. You can't recollect the dam and do a zrika on the mizbeach. But if the Kohen was makabel the dam in a kli shares from the Tzavar HaBehema, and then the kli shares, the mizrach was dropped or it's spilled, poured over, and then the dam was on the ritzpah, then he collects the dam from the ritzpah because the dam was already sanctified by the mizrach when it was received after the Kabbalah in the Kli Shares. So now the Gemara wants to know what happens if the Ktoris falls on the ground after the Chafina, but before it reaches the Kaf, it fell on the ground. And the Gemara vacillates. Nifsala Ktoris Zu, according to one side of the Gemara, the Ktoris becomes possible. Midin Nishpach, and it's equal to the case where the dam went straight from the Tzavar Behema onto the Ritzpah. O Dilma, Osvo Kshera. The Kohen Gadol can simply bend down, collect the Ktores, that's a lot easier than dam, and it's Kodshim. Just simply go on and put the Ktores into the Kaf as if nothing happened. Now the Gemara analyzes the two stud. Im Chafanov shel Kohen Gadol. Kikli Shares. Do you hear the language of the Gemara? Is then after the Chafina, it's like after Kabbalah Saddam, and the Ktores is still Kshera, pick it up from the ground. She'ein ha-Kabbalah b'kli, meaning in the Kaf, machsheres saktora, el ha-chofnayim atzmo. The hands of the Kohen Gadol, like a kli shares, are makabel the Ktores. Once it was a Kabbalah on the Ktores, then Nishpach doesn't pass on the Ktores. Kevon Shekain, Hareze Kamo Nishpach Adam Liachar Kabbalah B'Kli. So the Chafina equals Kabbalah. And why is that? Because the Chafna of Shel Kohen, Kikli Shares, O Dilma, Yidei Kohen Hareim Kitzavar HaBehema. Nothing changed after the Chafina. And therefore, it's only the Nesino L'Kli, meaning when he puts it into the Kaf, Shemachsheres Esaktoris. The Imkena Reis and Nishpach Adam Kodem Kabul. So what is the status of Chafina? Is it equal to Kabul Saddam in a Kli Sharis, or is it not? All the questions of the Mikdash David, again, if I'm right, are predicated on assuming one side in the Gemara, namely that the Ketores is possible if it fell after the Chafina, before it got into the Klisharis. But according to the other side, that the Gemara presents the possibility that Chafina is equal to Kabbalah Saddam in a Klisharis, and the Yadayim, the hands of the Kohen Gadol, are a Klisharis, then the questions of the Mikdash Melech go down the tubes. They're not problems at all. What was the Mikdash problem? He didn't understand how the Kohen Gadol, after the Chafina, could do an avoda of Chafina on that which is only Kadosh, meaning the Ketores, in Kedushas Damim, because the Kli, meaning the Machta, the second Machta, is not sanctified as a Kli Sharetz, which means, therefore, that the Ketores in the Machta is only Kadosh B'Kedushas Damim. How can it be that the Kohen Gadol is not going to do an avoda with Kedushas Damim? And it became even more of a severe question if he circumvents the Kaf and he goes straight from the Chafina to the Haktara in the Kodesh Kodshim. How can you be Maktir Kedushas Damim? The answer is I don't need the Kaf, because the Chafina is equal to Kabbalah B'Kli Sharetz. And according to that side of the Gemara, there's no psul if after the Chafina the Ketores falls on the Ritzvah Hazara, because it's after Kabbalah. Because the Yadayim and the Chafina of the Kohen Gadol is like Kabbalah and Kli Sharetz. That's going to sanctify the Ketores with Kedushas Haguf, like anything that goes into a Kli Sharetz for the purpose of Haktorah. And now we understand why the Gemara, which we didn't get to yet, is going to compare Chafina ben Amachta to Kmitzas Mincha. And the Mikdash David yells and screams, but in the case of Kmitza, you do the Kmitza from a Kli Sharetz, but the Chafina is being done from a Machta, which is a Kli Chol. But the answer is the Chafina itself is a Kli Sharetz. And that's why the Gemara compares Chafina to Kmitza. Now, I just want to admit the truth. This doesn't answer really the kash of the Mikdash David, because the Mikdash David is going to ask all these kashas according to that side of the Gemara, that Chafina's Kohen Gadol is not Kikli Sharetz, and that if the Torah falls onto the Ritzpah subsequent to the Chafina, it's possible, because it's not like Kabbalah Saddam B'Kli Sharetz. And according to that side, you have all the kashas of the Mikdash David. Okay, then. Now, what we haven't yet got up to, which Mirza Hashem will try to address tomorrow, is the exact location where in the Kodesh Kodashim the Haktorah of the Ketores would take place. And so we'll make a note of where we got up to here. And that's what we'll